The sun beat down on the cracked earth like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, relentless and unforgiving. Jedediah Thorne squinted, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, narrowed against the glare. Dust devils danced in the distance, taunting the parched land. It was in this desolation, a place where hope seemed to wither and die, that he saw it, an aberration against the bleached landscape. A small, frail figure, no bigger than a forgotten scarecrow, tied to a weathered fence post. His heart, a calloused old thing, lurched. He spurred his weary horse, Bess, forward, a grim line etching itself deeper around his mouth. As he drew closer, the horror sharpened. It was a child, a girl, her hair matted with dirt and sweat, her clothes torn to rags. Her head lolled, but as he dismounted, a flicker of movement, a tiny lift of her chin, told him she was alive. Her eyes, when they met his, were vast pools of terror, yet somewhere in their depths, a stubborn spark still fought against the encroaching darkness. A rusty trough lay overturned nearby, dry as bone. Whoever had done this had meant for her to die slowly, baked by the sun, tormented by thirst. A low growl rumbled in Jedediah's chest, a sound more animal than human. His hand, gnarled and work-worn, went to the knife at his belt. With swift, practiced movements, he cut the ropes that bit into her fragile wrists and ankles. They were new ropes, a chilling detail. He lifted her with a gentleness that belied his rough appearance. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of brittle bones and fear. He saw the marks on her skin, old and new, a testament to a cruelty that stole his breath. As he cradled her, offering water from his canteen which she gulped with desperate, painful swallows, a ghost flickered behind his eyes, the image of another small hand, another innocent face, lost to him long ago. He pushed the memory down, a familiar ache. This child was here, now. "Ain't no beast deserves this," he muttered, his voice raspy from disuse and dust. He settled her in front of him on Bess, her small body trembling against his. He didn't know who she was, or why this unspeakable thing had been done to her, but as he turned his horse towards his struggling ranch, a cold certainty settled in his soul, he would protect her. The bleak horizon seemed to stretch endlessly, but for the first time in a long, long while, Jedediah Thorne rode with a purpose that burned brighter than the merciless sun. The land was cruel, but man could be crueler still. And sometimes, one good man had to stand against that tide. The Thorne Ranch was a testament to endurance, much like its owner. The cabin was small, weathered gray, the barn listing slightly, the corrals in constant need of mending. It clung to life on the edge of nowhere, a solitary outpost against the wilderness. Jedediah carried the girl, Ilara, as he later learned her name was whispered in a moment of fevered sleep, into the sparse dwelling. He laid her on his own cot, the only soft place in the house. For days, she drifted between a fitful, haunted sleep and a waking state of silent terror. He tended to her with a clumsy patience, brewing thin broth, cleaning her wounds, his large hands surprisingly gentle. He spoke little, sensing words would only frighten her more. His presence was a quiet watchfulness. Ilara, when conscious, would simply stare at him, her eyes wide and unblinking, like a cornered animal trying to gauge the measure of a new threat. He saw the intelligence there, the resilience banked like embers beneath the ashes of her trauma. He noticed the way her small hand clutched the edge of the worn blanket, the only anchor in her terrifying new world. Slowly, painstakingly, a fragile trust began to sprout in the barren soil of her fear. She started to eat a little more, her gaze softening fractionally when he entered the room. He'd leave a carved wooden bird he'd once whittled for a ghost of memory on the small table beside her, and one morning, he found her fingers tracing its outline. News, or rather, uneasy speculation, traveled on the wind to the dusty collection of buildings that called itself the town of redemption. When Jedediah rode in for meager supplies, he felt the eyes of the townsfolk, that cowardly crowd as he often thought of them, burning into his back. Whispers followed him like shadows. "Thorne's got a girl out to his place, found her, they say, half dead, best not to get involved." Trouble finds men like Thorne. Martha, the stout, kind-faced woman who ran the general store, was the exception. She pressed a small sack of horehound candy into his hand. "For the little one," she said, her eyes warm with a sympathy others withheld. Heard tell Silas Blackwood's men were seen over by the county line, asking questions about a runaway. The name Silas Blackwood landed like a stone in Jedediah's gut. A man known for his ruthlessness, his vast holdings, and his belief that people were just tools or property. Jedediah merely nodded, his face unreadable. Obliged, Martha's back at the ranch. Ilara spoke her first clear words to him. He'd been mending a harness on the porch, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. She stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the fading light. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely audible. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers. He saw not just a victim, but a survivor. A quiet strength was beginning to uncurl within her, like a desert flower after a rare rain. He just nodded. Rest, child. You're safe here. But as the darkness gathered, the name Blackwood echoed in his mind, a harbinger of a storm he knew was coming. He checked his rifle at night, his movements economical and precise. He was a man who preferred peace, but the sleeping giant within him was stirring, disturbed by the scent of injustice. Ilara's voice, once found, began to weave the threads of her nightmare. Not in a rush, but in fragments, whispered in the quiet of the evenings as Jedediah cleaned his tools or stared into the small fire. Sometimes, a shared glance over a meager meal would unlock a memory. She spoke of a grand house that felt like a prison, of cold eyes and a heavy hand. She spoke of her parents, gone too soon, and how Silas Blackwood, a distant relative with a smile like a wolf, had taken her in, only to see her as another mouth to feed, another burden to be shed when inconvenient. The pole by the roadside, she explained with a chilling calmness that belied her age, was his final, cruel solution after she'd accidentally broken a prized porcelain figurine. He said? I was less value than the dirt on his boots, she murmured one night, her small hands twisting in her lap. Jedediah listened, his jaw tight, the lines around his eyes deepening. Each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of his own carefully buried grief. He saw his own lost daughter, Mary, in Ilara's haunted eyes, Mary, whose laughter had been silenced by a fever that swept through their homestead like a prairie fire, a fire he'd been powerless to stop, miles from any doctor, his wife succumbing soon after from a broken heart and the same relentless sickness. He had failed them, failed to protect them from the harsh indifference of the world. That failure had hollowed him out, leaving him a shell, until Ilara. Now, this new pain, Ilara's pain, resonated with his old sorrow, forging not despair, but a terrible, cold resolve. He would not fail again. The inevitable arrived on a blistering afternoon. 3 riders, cloaked in dust and arrogance, halted their horses at the edge of Jedediah's property. One, a burly man with a sneer permanently etched on his face, was clearly Blackwood's foreman, a man named Cully. Thorn! Cully bellowed, his voice grating. Mr. Blackwood knows you have his property. Send the girl out. Jedediah emerged from the cabin, his rifle held loosely at his side, but his stance was as unyielding as the ancient oaks in the high country. Ilara watched from the window, her small face pale, her knuckles white where she gripped the sill. She ain't property, Jedediah said, his voice quiet, yet it carried across the yard with the weight of granite. She's a child. And she stays, Cully laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Brave words, old man. Blackwood ain't one for being told no. He'll come for her. And for you. Jedediah's eyes, cold as glacial ice, met Cully's. Let him come. The riders wheeled their horses, spitting threats and dust, and galloped away. The silence they left behind was heavy, charged with unspoken fears and the grim certainty of what lay ahead. Jedediah looked towards the window, saw Ilara's small, determined face. He gave a curt nod, a silent promise. The shadow of Silas Blackwood now loomed, dark and suffocating. If you were Jedediah, with the memory of your own lost child searing your soul, what would you do? Would you hand over the girl to save your own skin, or would you stand against the coming storm? Tell me in the comments. That night, a real storm gathered, mirroring the tempest in Jedediah's heart. Lightning split the sky, and thunder rolled across the plains like the drums of war. The days that followed were thick with a suffocating tension. Jedediah worked his ranch with a grim focus, but his senses were unnaturally heightened, every snap of a twig, every distant bird call registering as a potential threat. He taught Ilara how to load the spare rifle, his hands briefly covering hers, showing her the mechanism. Her fingers were small but steady. He saw no fear in her eyes now, only a reflection of his own resolute calm. "If it comes to it," he said, his voice low, "aim for center mass." "Don't hesitate," she nodded, her young face set with a gravity far beyond her years. The anticipated arrival of Silas Blackwood wasn't long in coming. He didn't send his men this time, he came himself, a small, vindictive army at his back, perhaps a dozen riders, their faces hard and cruel. They rode not to the isolated ranch, but straight into the heart of Redemption, as if to make a public spectacle of his power. Blackwood, a man whose tailored coat and polished boots seemed an affront to the dusty, struggling town, dismounted before the general store, his eyes scanning the meager street like a hawk searching for prey. Word reached Jedediah via young Timmy, Martha's son, who rode Bess half to death to deliver the news. "He's in town, Mr. Thorne. Blackwood. He's calling you out. Says if you don't bring the girl, he'll burn your place to the ground, then the town." Jedediah's face was a mask of stone. He looked at Ilara. "Stay inside. Bar the door. Use the rifle if you have to." She clutched his hand. "Be careful, Jedediah." It was the first time she'd used his name. A flicker of warmth touched his stoic heart. He rode into Redemption not as a man seeking a fight, but as one who had no other choice. The townsfolk, the cowardly crowd, were gathered, their faces pale and anxious, huddled like sheep before wolves. Blackwood stood on the boardwalk, a sneer on his lips. "Thorne, I knew you'd scurry out eventually. Hand over the girl. She's mine." Stolen property. Jedediah dismounted, his movements deliberate. "She's not property, Blackwood. She's a human being. And you'll not lay a hand on her." Blackwood laughed, a cold, arrogant sound. Such sentimentality from a dirt-poor rancher. "Men, persuade him." Two of Blackwood's thugs moved forward, but before they could reach him, a voice cut through the tense air. "Hold it right there." Blackwood. Sheriff Brody stepped out from his office, a shotgun held steady in his hands. His face was grim, his eyes, for once, holding a spark of defiance. "This ain't your territory to be throwing your weight around, Silas. And Thorne ain't broken no law I know of." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Stay out of this, Brody. This is a private matter. Kidnapping and attempted murder ain't private, last I checked," Brody retorted, his gaze unwavering. He had seen Ilara once, when Martha had brought her into town for a discreet checkup with the traveling doc. The child's quiet dignity and the visible marks of cruelty had stirred something in his lawman's conscience. Jedediah's stand had fanned that spark into a flame. The standoff was electric. Blackwood, enraged, drew his own pistol. "You'll regret this, lawman." But as he raised it, Jedediah moved with surprising speed for a man his age. His own revolver was out, barking once. Blackwood cried out, clutching his shoulder, his pistol clattering to the dust. His men, momentarily stunned, surged forward, but the fight was already turning. Inspired by Brody, a few townsmen, armed with hunting rifles and a newfound courage, stepped up beside the sheriff. The ensuing fight was brutal and short. Jedediah moved like a wraith, his shots precise, aimed to disable, not to kill, driven by a cold fury. He saw not just Blackwood's men, but the faces of all who preyed on the weak. When the dust settled, Blackwood was disarmed and bleeding, his men subdued or scattered. Jedediah stood over him, his chest heaving, the smoke from his gun curling in the still air. Blackwood, stripped of his bravado, looked up with fear in his eyes, no longer a tyrant, just a pathetic, wounded bully. Justice or vengeance? The question hung heavy. Jedediah saw Ilara's face in his mind, her resilience, her hope. He lowered his gun. "He's yours, Sheriff," Brody nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. "Mansfield jail ain't got no feather beds, Silas." The sun that rose the next morning seemed to shine a little brighter on the town of Redemption. Silas Blackwood and his remaining men were gone, hauled away by Sheriff Brody and a hastily formed posse of newly emboldened townsfolk. The air, usually thick with dust and unspoken anxieties, felt cleaner, lighter. Jedediah Thorne rode back to his ranch, weary but not broken. His arm was bandaged where a stray bullet had grazed him, a minor price for the peace that had been won. As he approached the cabin, Ilara ran out to meet him, her face alight with a relief so profound it made his old heart ache in a new, unfamiliar way. She didn't say anything, just threw her small arms around his waist, burying her face in his dusty shirt. He rested his calloused hand on her head, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in shared adversity. The cowardly crowd was slowly transforming. Later that week, Martha arrived with a wagon laden with supplies, flour, sugar, cloth for a new dress for Ilara, and even some seeds for a small garden. Other townsfolk followed, offering help to repair the barn, to mend fences, their earlier fear replaced by a quiet respect for the stoic rancher and the brave little girl he had sheltered. The Thorne Ranch, once a symbol of solitary struggle, began to show signs of new life. With Ilara's help, Jedediah planted Martha's seeds beside the cabin. Watching her carefully tend the small green shoots, a genuine smile gracing her lips, he felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the sun. The ghosts of his past, of Mary and his wife, were still there, their absence a permanent scar on his soul. But they no longer held him captive in a prison of grief. Ilara's presence had not erased the sorrow, but it had made room for hope, for purpose. He was no longer just a man haunted by what he had lost, but a man defined by what he had chosen to protect and nurture. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Ilara leaned her head against his arm. "It's nice here," she said softly. "Feels like home." Jedediah looked out at the vast, starlit expanse. The land was still harsh, life still a struggle. But now, it was a shared struggle, a shared life. He put his arm around her small shoulders. "It is home, Ilara," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he no longer tried to suppress. It is he had taken in a starving orphan, and in doing so, he had found his own salvation. Redemption wasn't just the name of a dusty town, it was a journey of the heart, a testament to the enduring power of compassion in a world that often seemed to have forgotten its meaning. Jedediah Thorne found his peace, not in forgetting the past, but in building a future. Ilara, once a symbol of suffering, became a beacon of hope. What did you think of Jedediah's choice to protect Ilara, even at great personal risk? If you were inspired by their story of courage and redemption, click on our next tale of the Untamed West, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that test the human spirit and reaffirm the quiet strength found in unexpected places.